introduce Bella Merlin for this research talk. Bella is an actor, writer, singer-songwriter and professor of acting and directing in the Department of Theatre, Film and Digital Production at the University of California, Riverside. With a PhD from the University of Birmingham and graduate training at the State Institute of Cinematography, Russia, and Guildford School of Acting. She's been acting professionally for over 25 years. She's the author of several books on acting, including the complete Stanislavsky toolkit, Acting the Basics, Facing the Fear, An Actor's Guide to Overcoming Stage Fright, and Shakespeare and Company, When Action is Eloquence, co-authored with Tina Packer. US roles include Jenny in the award-winning Mente Revolver by writer-director Alexandra Ramirez, several seasons at Shakespeare and Company, Massachusetts, and the Colorado Shakespeare Festival, as well as 2 original solo plays, Tilly Nobody, Catastrophes of Love, and Nell Gwyn, a dramatic essay on acting and prostitution. Before leaving the UK, she appeared in David Hare's The Permanent Way, directed by Max Stafford Clark, Out of Joint, Royal National Theatre. She Stoops to Conquer and A Laughing Matter, also directed by Max Stafford Clark of Out of Joint, Royal National Theatre. Many theatre appearances and various roles in new works, as well as BBC, TV and radio, and I'm pleased to say several of my plays. Bella is known internationally for her work on Konstantin Stanislavsky, leading workshops around the world from Australia to Zimbabwe. She has also presented extensively at UK drama schools, including Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, RADA and Bristol Old Vic. As a director, she set up Shakespeare on a Shoestring at the University of California, Davis, and at UC Riverside she has directed several productions, including most recently 2020 Vision, a hybrid filmic theatre piece created with the students. A documentary featuring her use of Stanislavsky's rehearsal process, active analysis, can be found on the online learning platform Digital Theatre. I wanted to say it all because I think it all feeds into in together. It's all relevant. So now I'll hand you over to Bella. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And so then hopefully you can all see my PowerPoints. So this talk live on Zoom, I'm so thrilled to be here. As you may know, I was a participant in Lucy's research presentation earlier in the year, back in May, when I was honored to perform in her play, The Wild Tenant. So it's a real thrill to be part of your research series right now. As Lucy said, I'm an actor, so human connection is the raw material of the work I do. I'm a Stanislavsky practitioner, so unpacking human behavior is my passion. I'm also a technophobe. Mediated communication is not my delight. So with the abrupt global cessation of in-person teaching in March 2020, I felt that an overwhelming call to arms was being heralded. How, as an actor trainer, was I going to be able to sustain any kind of meaningful and transformative learning possibility when breath, space, human interaction, the subtlety of sighs and chuckles and yawns and flinches were no longer a part of the classroom's texture? I confess my knee-jerk reaction to the whole thing was, no way, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. How on earth am I going to teach actor training without a human being in the room? I wanted the nuances of psychophysical actor training, all those little things I've just said, the flinches, the sighs, the groans, the winks. I also wanted that dynamic communication between the live audience and the actor, whether that live audience is in the theatre or whether it's actually the crew and the director on a television or film set. However, in addition to being an actor, a Stanislavsky practitioner and a technophobe, I'm also a practical researcher. So I instantly thought, okay, how do I take this embodied experience that we're all having and try to see what might be some new knowledge within that experience? How could I turn no way into now? Okay, Yeah, let's do this. Let's give this a go. Let's see if we can create some empathic, cathartic work through this remote, isolated experience. And the tool to which I turned from Stanislavsky's kit was a constant state of inner improvisation. Between spring 2020 and spring 2021, I found myself adapting 3 10-week acting courses to the online forum. I found myself leading several international acting workshops, and I found myself directing 2 original productions. So the daily encounter with the checkerboard of 2-dimensional faces quickly became part of reckoning with 4-dimensional experiences. And in fact, this image you can see up here of this checkerboard of repeated faces is from the piece that I'm going to talk a little bit about that Lucy already mentioned, 2020 Vision. You can see they're all in these big glasses to try and have 2020 vision. And you can see that behind them is one of the iconic architectural structures at UC Riverside. So this combination of faces in frames soon became really the modus operandi of how I was going to do any actor training with the students and how I was going to direct anything. This idea of frames. Really, I found myself asking, how do I frame Stanislavsky? And what I'm going to share with you this evening, I keep thinking it's this morning because I'm in California where it's shortly after 8:30, this afternoon, is I'm going to look at 3 different things. How I went about assessing and addressing the foundations of Stanislavsky's system through this framed encounter with students and actors. Then I'm going to look a little bit at how the actual filmic given circumstances of life on Zoom actually created some really useful dynamics and vocabulary for me as I was exploring this life. And then finally, I'm going to turn to the creating of a Zoom performance 2020 vision. So that's a little bit of an outline of what I'm going to share with you over the next 30, 35 and 40 minutes. So since let's just turn to the first one. Launch meeting, the foundations of Stanislavsky's system. Whenever I'm starting any project, whether it's preparing a workshop, whether it's doing something like this, whether it's setting up a 10-week acting course, I ask myself Stanislavsky's 6 fundamental questions, which are who, where, when, why, for what reason, and how. So in the Zoom life, my first question, who are we? Well, we were a group of people facing a completely unknown situation. Back in spring 2020, none of us had been in this environment before, where suddenly everybody has to be in a remote digital environment. Where are we? Well, everybody was in a room that for them was going to be more familiar to them than it was going to be for me as the instructor. So unlike your typical classroom environment where, you know, probably the instructor is more familiar with it than the students, but everybody's got a somewhat objective relationship to that classroom or rehearsal room or black box theatre, whatever it is. Now, each individual was in a room that was very personalized for them, whether it was their bedroom or a shared living room or whatever it was. They knew their rooms better than I knew their rooms. So that in itself became quite an interesting given circumstance to handle and to fathom. When are we there? Well, in the middle of a situation that humanity's never encountered before, a global pandemic. Why were we in this environment? Well, I was trying to create some kind of valuable actor training given the remote and unusual set of circumstances. For what reason did I want to do that? Well, on the one hand, I wanted to be able to continue education, which we were all having to do at that time, of course. But also I wanted to explore this valuable new information about the human condition that we were all discovering as we went along, as we began to navigate this situation. And I don't know about what it was like for you at University of Aberystwyth, but when the campus at UC Riverside first closed down, we thought it was just going to be for 2 weeks. And then suddenly 2 weeks became a whole term. And then suddenly it became a whole year. So we were all, for what reason were we doing, was I wanting to do this, to discover what new understanding of human connection we were all eliciting from each other in this set of new circumstances. How were we going to go about it? I had no idea. We were just all going to dive in and see what came out. In many ways, I found that the COVID quarantine was a great leveler. Nothing could be taken for granted anymore. It was also a time of great reflection, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement reigniting in the wake of George Floyd's murder. There was a galvanizing of the Me Too movement, and there was a burgeoning opportunity to decolonize, decentralize theatre making, and to broaden inclusivity. So there was lots of social movement and social investigation going along in parallel with us, or at the same time as us navigating this new learning and performing environment. And I actually quite enjoyed the disruption to the pedagogical hierarchy. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. An actor, in Stanislavsky's An Actor Prepares, he ends with the final chapter, which in many ways is a rationale for the whole preceding book. And the chapter's called On the Threshold of the Subconscious. And he talks very explicitly about two sides of an experience, before stepping over that threshold and after stepping over that threshold. And he says, on this side of it, the threshold of the subconscious, we have the simplicity of a limited fantasy. Beyond that threshold, the simplicity of a larger imagination. Our freedom on this side of the threshold is limited by reason and conventions. Beyond it, our freedom is bold, willful, active, and always moving forward. Given the cold splash of diving into Zoom teaching, I found myself immediately struck by a sense of sides. I was on this side of the screen. My students were on the other side of the screen. The hierarchy of teaching was inevitably reduced. And in fact, it was completely inverted, because whilst I was on my side of the screen looking at this checkerboard of faces, they were each on their side of the screen looking at their checkerboard of faces. So it was as if each of us was now suddenly standing in front of the classroom. So we were each in some way in the physical dynamics that the instructor might conventionally be. So the whole environment was disrupted in a way that I found really playful and exciting. Furthermore, for most of us, teaching on Zoom, we can also see ourselves. So we're having this strange sense of being on both sides of the screen. I'm here speaking, whilst I can also see my image on the Zoom screen, which actually in Teams I can't see. So this is kind of fun. I can just see Lucy. I can't see anybody else. So this understanding of being, I'm here and I'm there, and they're there. And the whole concept of sides excited me. And therefore, our collective unfamiliarity with this digital situation demanded what Stanislavsky would call a bold, willful, active imagination. Furthermore, the disruption of reason and conventions. In fact, this situation seemed utterly unreasonable and wholly unconventional, that suddenly we were now all trying to act and train through technology. Actually, for me, I think engaged unconscious and intuitive choices in how to go about the art of acting in a way I simply never anticipated. When I'm at actor training, and also when I'm working as an actor, there are 4 particular tools that I really like to explore. They are psychophysical coordination, by which I mean whatever's going on inside the human being has a very porous membrane with the outside world. So whatever I'm feeling, how do I convey it to the outside world? And conversely, whatever information is in the outside world, how is that landing on my inner landscape? So this inner-outer dialogue, this inner-outer membrane is very, very porous. So that's how I define psychophysical coordination. My inner life and my outer life, my outer expression, my inner feeling are coordinated. The next tool that I like to use and explore and teach is willing vulnerability. I mean, heavens above, you can't be an actor without being vulnerable. You can't put yourself on a stage or in front of a camera knowing that people are going to not only watch the story you're telling, but also probably in some respect critique the way in which you're telling that story, that's vulnerable. That you can't get away with it. If you don't want to be vulnerable, don't be an actor. However, there needs to be a willingness to that. I'm willingly going on that journey of putting myself out there to be the storyteller, to be the canvas and the instrument at one and the same time. And that requires a certain playfulness, what Michael Chekhov calls a quality of ease, that however massive and traumatic and dramatic the character's circumstances might be, I'm engaged in them in a playful, easy way, so that it is pleasurable for me as the actor and hopefully for the audience receiving that story. That therefore also brings with it dynamic listening, which is connected to all of the previous three. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. So in terms of this life on Zoom, physical coordination, psychophysical coordination took on a new perspective for me, in the sense that because I could see less of their bodies, I could only see a certain amount through the screen. And because their space was restricted, we couldn't necessarily run across the length of a studio or leap in the air or whatever we might do. I found myself tuning in more acutely to the assumptions I'd previously made unintentionally regarding ableism. I began to realize that I'd always considered actors should be athletic, that psychophysical means being the athlete of the soul. The minute my ability to see the whole body was disabled, I suddenly realized how ableist I was being. And that therefore tuned me into how I was using my vocabulary. And whereas in the past I might have said, close your eyes and listen to what's going on inside, I began to be aware that that in itself assumed something about an ability to see what the closed eye, what the open eye might be, how some people might not even want to close their eyes. How in the past I might have said, take a walk around the room. I now realize that also assumed things about able-bodiedness. And so I was now saying, take a journey around the room. And you can do that from sitting in your seat. Maybe it's just your head journeying around. So curiously, this life on Zoom tuned me into my own unconscious biases regarding physical ability. I'll say a little bit more about inclusivity in a while. Willing vulnerability, in many respects, because everybody was working in their own space, a space they were more familiar with than they might be the classroom or the studio. Innate in that, I found people were often more willing to play. They already felt comfortable in the room they were in. So they were, there was an easiness about how they explored things. Added to which they could turn their cameras off if they wanted to. So if actually we were exploring an exercise where, you know, individual tuning of the psychophysical instrument, and they didn't particularly either want other people to see them or to see other people, they could turn off their cameras. And you know, I trusted they were doing it and that they hadn't gone off for a cup of tea. But that in itself, actually, the logistics of choosing whether to have the camera on or off, and I could choose to turn my camera off so that they weren't aware of the instructor being present in the space as well, which gave them a little bit more willingness to take risks, try things out. In terms of playfulness, I actually found the chat became an unexpected delight. Also, in terms of willing vulnerability, if I would say, okay, now pop into the chat what you just discovered about yourself from that exercise or that improvisation we've just done, I found the level of openness and honesty that was coming through the chat often was way more accessible or open-hearted than if I were to say, all right, anybody want to give me their response, where maybe one or two hands might go up, maybe three or four. Suddenly very open sharings were coming through the chat, and playfulness. They would tease each other through the chat. They would tease me through the chat. They would also give each other moral support. If one said, oh, this was tricky because I'm having a bit of a difficult time at the moment. My uncle's got COVID and we're concerned. They would give each other moral support. There was this whole sense of community going on through the chat, as if it was like whisperings that we were all privy to, and it was like this little lattice work of connection, communication, which was unexpected and really rather wonderful. In terms of dynamic listening, I want to draw our attention actually to a new book that's just recently come out from Maria Shevtsova called Rediscovering Stanislavsky. And she flags up his phrase that often gets translated, oh, heavens above, never have a telephone on, especially when you're doing an online thing. The word for attention or concentration and attention, she references as общение. Общение is the Russian word that we translate as attention, concentration, focus, etc. And I love Maria Shevtsova's definition of this. She says the kindly, loving relation between self and others that binds people together in work and play and establishes communion between them. And because we were all in this new environment together, inevitably there felt like there was a kind of kindly, loving bonding between us as we were all fathoming out, how are we going to do this life in Zoom? How are we going to do this actor training? How are we going to create performance work? And I found that my attention to the checkerboard of faces, and UC Riverside is #1 in the US for social mobility. So we are a very, very broad demographic. So I was visually seeing the array of faces in the checkerboard, which tuned my attention even more acutely than if I'm looking around a circle of people or I'm standing in front of a class and the class is sitting there. For some reason, this focus of the checkerboard of faces sharpened my understanding of our diversity, our inclusion, in a really exciting way for me as an instructor. It reminded me, as Shevtsova does in her book, Rediscovering Stanislavsky, that Stanislavsky's system is inherently inclusive. He's basically inviting everything the actor has, their ethnicity, their gender, their race, their ancestral biography, their personal autobiography, their physical ability, their disability. This is all part of who they are. That's part of the instrument that they're bringing into the space, into the role, into the ensemble, as one of the layers, the textures in the storytelling palette of, or toolkit, I should say. And at the heart of this, of course, is creative individuality, the human spirit. And Stanislavsky invites us, as we are exploring ourselves as actors, but also the character, to manifest the life of the human spirit. And for me, this is connection, communion. It binds us together in work and play. So what I'm saying is, curiously, the frame of Zoom, attending to everybody's faces in the checkerboard of faces I was seeing on the screen, sharpened my understanding of what it means to bring the life of the human spirit of each of us and of the ensemble to the fore. So the frame did the work for me. Zoom did the work for me. At this point, I think it might be time for a musical interlude as we spend a moment thinking about Zoom.
Here we are in a Zoom classroom, room. No no more sitting next to whom. I don't know who your students are. Anyway, 500 in a lecture could be in a tune. Half the time. The lecture's freaking boring. Bored to tears, to sleep, to death, to doom. Zoom. Ooh, that was quite exciting. We almost had something to do. Internet connection unstable. Professor, please. Student connection unstable. Student connection unstable. Student connection unstuck. Student connection unstuck. Student connection unstuck. Student connection unstuck. Unstable stew. Unstable stew. Unstable stew. Unstable stew. Here we are, friends and faces, 3 dimensions turned into two, hardly human, hardly students, more like animals in cages caged up at the zoo. What's to say? No more left to say. I'm dying to sleep. I'm dying to sleep. To die to sleep. To sleep. To dream. To dream of school. Where students actually teach. Where teachers actually teach. Where people actually preach. Where hands actually reach. Where I can touch you. Where you can see me. Where we can breathe each other's breath. When we speak. When we speak. When we speak.
So, can you give me a thumbs up if you saw that? Okay, Lucy, I can see you only. Excellent. So that was the song Zoom from the piece 2020 Vision that I'm going to speak about in a little while. So the second part of this talk is actually how the filmic given circumstances, the frame of Zoom, became an important part of the teaching. And again, in terms of Stanislavsky, understanding the given circumstances of our situation actually were the gateway really into understanding how to live this life on Zoom as actor trainers and as performance makers. As a professor in a department that is theatre, film and digital production, a little like your department is theatre, film and television, I'm always trying to understand how I can combine acting for the screen and acting for the stage simultaneously. So starting off with the given circumstance of where were each of my students, they were in a location that was their bedroom. Literally, it was their bedroom or their living room, but what was the literal environment they were in? But then what was the metaphorical location they were in? How would it be if we said this was a film set or it was a theatre set? In other words, what would happen if they saw their rooms now suddenly as a film set or a theatre set? Imagining that everything's been put there very specifically, either by an art director or a scenic designer, I was therefore inviting them to begin to see what might be very familiar to them with a slightly unfamiliar eye. that color was deliberately put next to that color. That cobweb was deliberately put there by the scenic designer. That muck of papers was deliberately put there by, so that they would start to see, they'd start to experience being in the familiar space with a tinge of unfamiliarity that might then merge themselves with the idea of a character or an environment, which would then spring them into the magic if. What if this were a film set? What's the film? What's the plot? Who am I as a character in this plot? What is this room I'm in? So that we could, as I say, merge self into character. Then it was about what's in the frame. How is the frame telling the story? So moving less from them in their actual environment and what this environment might mean to, all right, what is the viewer on the screen seeing? What information are they getting, and how therefore are they going to be constructing a story implicitly and explicitly through what they're seeing? Where does light and shade naturally fall? Where is the eye line naturally going? Inviting them, the class, to look at the checkerboard of frames in front of them and see what each of those frames was telling them in terms of color, light, texture, positioning in the frame. Is somebody in shadow? Is somebody actually using two computers, so they might be looking one way whilst this camera is picking them up? What's the information there? What happens if I come very close to the screen? What happens if I move away? And the fisheye lens of the zoom camera can be very, very dynamic, because as you move closer to it, it is enormous, and you don't have to move far away from it for suddenly the perspective between the enormous hand and the body to be quite significant. So how could we use our positioning to this camera to be part of our storytelling? And this ability to come very close, I found, created a real sense of remote intimacy. We might not be in the same room together, but we could feel very intimate with each other. We could feel as if we were having a very bonded communications. So playing with that. And if we look at this picture, this is one of my actors from 2020 Vision. This is a screenshot from 2020 Vision. If we look at Amrita, we can see the back of her head, so we're aware that there is a kind of 360 feeling to this two-dimensional picture. We can see these lines, very clear lines, the mirror, the line of the ceiling, the lines of the bedstead. So there's a feeling of her being, if you like, caged in a little bit, stuck in this room that she's in throughout quarantine. She's got a device in her hand, so that she's talking to a device with another device on her in her hand. So understanding how so much of what we consumed during the year of quarantine was mediated, was through our devices. And yet, if we look at this mirror, we can also see that some of it's peeling away a little bit. So there's almost like there's something behind the mirror. So another dimension, another layer. The bright pop of her teal colored t-shirt against these rather neutral tones. What's that saying? So really beginning to understand. Now, this was a screenshot from 2020 Vision, so it's a deliberate pose. But what happens if we therefore take some of their, haphazard, wherever they might be zooming into the class from, and look at what that information is giving us, so that we are tuning our understanding of the frame storytelling, whilst also understanding our role as actors within that frame to move that space and tell that story. Which takes me to the idea of absence and presence. What happens if I exit the frame? What if I come out of the frame and you see then the empty space, then I come into the frame? How does the speed at which I come into the frame tell you the story? What happens if I come from the side? I can't actually see my own image because we're on Teams, not Zoom, so I have no idea what you're able to see. But what happens if I pop up from underneath? How might I play with the viewer's understanding of the frame in order to, again, tell my story or connect through the screen towards my viewer? And in fact, this gave me a little idea. I was doing a workshop for Central School of Speech and Drama, and we'd done a very intensive 2-day workshops, so lots of sitting in front of the screen and lots of playing around in the space, etc. And right at the end, I said, okay, just feel yourself sitting in your chair. Feel all that information that you've consumed over the last 2 days, and then get up, exit that space, see your empty chair, see your empty screen, see this person, this imaginary person sitting here who has absorbed all that information, and all that information is percolating through them. And when you're ready, then come and sit in the imaginary body of the person filled with that information. See all these other people filled with this information. And you know, I was sort of playing with absence and presence in terms of both the screen and in terms of an imaginary body and filling that imaginary body. And what was a very simple exercise, which I'm afraid I didn't explain terribly well just then when I was describing it, but as a result of doing this exercise, they went, oh my God, yeah, I can feel my fullness just by exiting and then come and sitting in my imaginary body. And one of the students, the participants said, so how do you adapt this when you're working with people in an actual room together? How do you do this exercise? And I said, I have no idea. I've never done it before. I was making it up as I went along. So in many respects, the Zoom environment encouraged within me a certain bold, risk-taking, working on the spur of the moment in a way that I began to go, okay, maybe I've got a little bit staid, a little bit familiar with my actor training teaching, and this new environment is provoking me towards being more experimental, me to dare to be in a constant state of inner improvisation. And I found actually, consequently, having now gone back into the classroom this past term, that I'm much more willing to just give something a go. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I'm not sure that without the leveling of the COVID quarantine, I would have necessarily pressed that reset button to be adventurous and playful in quite the same way. Much of this filmic given circumstance, I also wanted to understand, how do we reach through the screen and connect with each other when clearly it is literally impossible? Maybe it's time for another musical interlude.
Oh, buddy, do rock. Oh, buddy, do rock. Buddy was born with the romantic spirit, and I saw you sitting in mass. But you what? It was before everything stopped in this crazy pandemic, and I dreamed we would fly from the world and beyond. Now you hardly know me, I'm not even here. We're stuck in our computers, and we are here. So I'll reach out through my screen. I'm gonna take you to places that we've never been. Put a smile on your face in each virtual space, and we'll love like it's 2019. Buddy, do walk. Buddy, do walk. Our dream day will dawn as the morning star glimmers. Aurora borealis is painted the skies, and when we pondered and wandered the green planet Iceland, do it your way in Norway with stars in our eyes. Then it's breakfast and gluten with pancakes and tea, and the Himalayas in harmony. I'm gonna reach out through my screen. I'm gonna take you to places that we've never been. Put a smile on your face in each virtual space, and we'll love like it's 2019. Buddy, do what? cable cars clinking, hear the blue herons nesting in old elfin chests. Been to a beach in the Bahamas where we're lying by the shores with the palms softly swaying. Can I be yours? I'm gonna reach out through my sleeve. I'm gonna take you to places that we've never been. Put a smile on your face in each virtual space, and we'll love like it's 2019. Oh, what did you want? Tonight, take a flight for dinner in Paris. We'll dine mighty fine in the Champs-Élysées. I'll take your hand and we'll meander through the city of lovers, and we'll know that the morning's just hours away. Then you'll turn out your light and see the moonbeams, and we'll meet in the night in our own sweet dreams. 'Cause we reach out through our sleeves, and we travel to places that we've never been, with a smile on our face in each virtual space, and we love like it's 2019. How do you do what? Yes, we loved like it's 2019.
So the final part, and in many ways this is the shortest because you've seen two examples of what we actually did with 2020 Vision. I was due to be directing Three Sisters in the spring of this year, and when it became evident we were still going to be in quarantine and the campus was closed, I went, I don't know what the point is actually. I don't really know why I'd take another extant play off the shelf and try and make it work somehow through mediated means. So instead we created this piece, 2020 Vision, which comprised 16 autobiographical monologues, which the students wrote in a couple of my acting classes. And basically the prompt was anything that you want to share about your experience of this past year. And it was, it covered a range of topics, from the shock of suddenly not being on campus, having the regular student experience, to family bereavements from COVID, to online shopping, to global warming, pandemic as much as the COVID pandemic, to elements of self-reflection leading to optimism towards what life might be like at the end. In the pre-production phase, everything was collaborated through remoteness. None of us met ever. Well, there might have been once or twice, but in essence, everybody worked independently. The designers, the editors, obviously the actors, myself as the director, David Rösner, who was my musical arranger. We did everything. He lives in Munich. I live in Los Angeles. So, you know, everything was remote. And the challenge for me you know, I'd only ever directed theatre before, where you've got people in the room, you feel what's happening, you watch how they're moving on the stage, you create the stage pictures from what their instincts and intuitions are. Now I realized I was going to have a very, very, very clear vision in my head before we started, but how to convey that vision to all the people that were going to then manifest it through their performances or through the edits. So I worked very closely with a student storyboard artist, the design team, who were actually our production staff. We discussed colors and textures, and I knew I wanted us to go through a year. So there would be 4 seasons, 4 monologues in each season, a song starting the show, ending the show, and then punctuating the seasons. But how might we, through the color palette, take people through the year? How might we, through the lighting, take people through a day, if you like, that it starts very dark, but it ends up bright, because I wanted it to be a journey of optimism. So a lot of pre-production stuff had to happen in a way that I'd never engaged in before, because I've never even thought to do anything like this before. But again, the collaboration that was happening with people simply through texts, emails, Zoom conversations was extraordinary. When it came to rehearsals, we had 4 weeks, and it was pretty intense because we had to line everything up in time to get all the edits together in time for the public sharing. The actors were all sent green screens. In terms of the songs were the trickiest. Obviously, the monologues were fairly easy because it was each student in their own room. The designers, the costume set designers said, okay, show me what wardrobe you've got, what colors have we got that fit with this season. Okay, we might have to send you a costume piece. The lighting designer would go, okay, what natural light have you got? Okay, we might have to send you a little one of these round light things that we have. The art designer would say, all right, let's have a look at a few locations you have in your house. Oh, that color wall is good. Oh, that window there is good. That mirror behind you is good. So everything was navigated on a sort of one-to-one basis with the monologuers, which was the simple part. The difficult part was the songs, because, as you will all know from doing so much mediated work yourself, Zoom has a delay. So there is no way that we can synchronize 7 singers. This particular number you see here, which is called Scream, which is a 10-minute opus that takes us through every month of the year from March 2020 through till February 2021. There's 8 people present. You know, how do we rehearse 8 people? Well, in fact, you can't. We had to do it. We tried various bits of technology, just didn't work. So we had to, you know, each person would do one-to-one rehearsals, and it's 3-part harmonies for everything. Then how on earth do we choreograph? Because not only was there a delay, but sometimes people would be in mirror mode on Zoom, but they didn't realize, or I didn't realize. So I'd be going, no, it's not left arm up, it's right arm up, and they'd go, it is my right arm, and it was all quite a playful adventure. But we got a Tony-nominated choreographer called Sam Pinkleton to come in, and basically he said, I'm not going to choreograph. I'm just going to give the students vocabulary. They themselves will choreograph it. I'm just going to give them some suggestions, some games. And we had a very, very fun session with him. And this particular number that you see here, Scream, as I say, it's a 10-minute opus. It's 13 verses that sort of go round and round and round with the newscasters giving us the headlines from each of those months. So the way that we rehearsed it was that this is an idea I nicked from Sam Pinkleton, because they were all facing the screen. I would direct them by holding up cards saying, this is the verse, you do this. This is the verse, you do this. This is the verse, you do this. So it was all kind of primitive, but worked, and it was kind of fun. And that, again, trying to work through the screen in the simplest ways possible was really quite adventuresome and great. When it came to the actual recording, the students had so much independence and agency. You know, what I was asking of them really was unspeakable, because I was asking them to be their own DPs, green screen operators, camera operators, directors, props person, wardrobe person, etc. Now, obviously, you know, we couldn't record everybody at the same time, so they were off doing it themselves. So during the tech rehearsal, we would say, okay, this hour, you're going to go away and record yourself doing this song. Then they'd send me back their recording, and then I would give them notes. And then when it came to the dress rehearsal, again, the same. They would be off recording on their own. They'd send us what they'd just done. I'd go, oh, no, you're just a little bit out of shot. That means when you put the green screen there, it's going to give you a flat head. So you're going to have to go back and redo the whole thing because you whatever. Or, you know, somebody was a bit out of focus. Or, no, you're going to have to do the whole thing again. So the dress rehearsal, which took us over 2 days, actually, the dress and the recording was a 2-day thing. And it was like ground control. I'd got my telephone texting people. I was Zooming with some people. I'd got my production team also Zooming and doing little bits and pieces. And it was remarkable what the students did. Again, you've already seen a couple of the numbers, bearing in mind that never were people in the same room together. It really then actually was over in post-production to the editors. And the editors had to do such a delicate process. David Rösner did the edit of the music. And because we'd had so little rehearsal time and it was all through Zoom, we couldn't have that precision that you'd normally get when you've got people in the room of saying, okay, hold this note for 4 and then off with a nice D at the end or a T at the end or whatever it might be. So David microscopically edited together all the soundtracks, matching up people's consonants, matching up exactly, some would come in just a fraction of a second early, and then the student film editors did exactly the same. They had to match up the lip syncing with the fact that the choreography wasn't always absolutely spot on in the way that, again, you could fine tune it if you were in the room together. And the whole thing really was an ebullient celebration of collaboration. Obviously, I haven't got a chance to show you the whole thing, but I will just share with you the trailer so that you get a little taste of what it was all about.
Reports are just in that a new strain of the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, has been discovered.
Studying at college for my degree. Think coronavirus hit us, now my life is on hiatus. I don't know where I'm gonna be.
I did not think that COVID was going to be like this, like the last 12 months.
My mental state has been slowly declining for the last few months.
I didn't go to the movies or the beach, nothing. No, I did my part, and I still got it.
It was legitimately like the apocalypse had happened, and we were in the apocalypse, just strutting through the end of the world and society.
Oh my mother, what a year it's been. It seems like humanity's regressing to the mean. I don't need the meanie and the mean. I need the mean.
Information overload, and it was not healthy that my screen time was 13 hours a day.
I guess something I've discovered in this time, especially after the death of a loved one, is how important it is to be grateful for the small things, you know?
Change will come in time.
I'm gonna reach out through my screen. I'm gonna take you to places that we've never been. Put a smile on your face.
With everything happening in the world, I wanted to reconnect with myself so that I could be someone that could heal others after healing myself.
We can all be proud of what we've done. We're living through history right now, and there will be people tens to hundreds of years from today that will recognize you and what you've done through this past year. Be proud of yourselves. You got through COVID. Now think what you can do.
Everything we dreamed of, everything we see, is within the 21st year of the 21st century. 2020, we got 2020 vision.
And so, in conclusion, I would say that as a practice-based researcher, the result of the enforced digital classroom was curiously that I came to love life on Zoom. I loved the way in which it combined an actor's willing vulnerability with the technicalities of the frame as storyteller, and the ease with which we can constantly interweave the pedagogy of stage acting and screen techniques really was a true silver lining to the COVID iCloud. The power of connection through collaboration, training the students in their self-sufficiency and their professionalization skills, again, was something I hadn't wholly anticipated beforehand. And I found that the dynamics of the Zoom environment drew out Stanislavsky's appeal to creative individuality, with each actor increasingly becoming the author and the agent of much of their own creative experience. In hindsight, I can see we were spurred with 2020 vision towards the intent of Stanislavsky's system, which is to step across the threshold towards inspired, impulse-led acting, perhaps even more acutely than the conventional in-person rehearsal room might allow. The truth to tell, whether it's going to be the self-taped audition, the remote global classroom, or the immediate creation of online content, in the words of one of my undergraduate actors, Jay Duong, who was in the songs you saw, Zoom acting is probably here to stay. And now, meeting ended by host. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bella. That was really interesting.